Marchand was elected to the Portsmouth City Council and later became mayor. He was also the director of corporate relations for UNH. He lives in Portsmouth with his wife and 2 young daughters.
Mr. Marchand, your opening statement, please.
Sure. For those seeking clarity, allow me to help. I am the progressive choice for governor. I'm the only one here that voted for Bernie this spring. I'm the only one 100% against both Northern Pass and the death penalty. I'm the only one with a plan for paid family leave and that supports the legalization of marijuana. This is a progressive state, a blue state. I represent the future of New Hampshire.
All right, let's move now to Executive Counselor Colin Van Oosteren.
Colin Van Oosteren was born in California, graduated from George Washington University, and has an MBA from Dartmouth. Van Oosteren came to New Hampshire to work as the comms director for Governor Jeanne Shaheen's first bid for U.S. Senate. He opened a political consulting firm and was also brand manager at Stonyfield Farm. Van Oosteren is in his second term on the Executive Council, lives in Concord with his wife and 2 children.
Councilor Van Oosteren, opening statement.
Well, hi, I'm Colin Van Oosteren. I'm running for governor to keep New Hampshire moving forward. I am a dad of 2 young boys who you just saw. I've worked as a business leader at some of our best employers here in New Hampshire. And I, for the last 4 years, have been working on the Executive Council, working on things like expanding access to health care with Governor Hassan, tackling the drug crisis, doing more to restore Planned Parenthood funding, which we succeeded in, and investing in renewable and clean energy. Let's keep New Hampshire moving forward.
All right, now let's get a quick biography from governor's candidate Mark Connolly.
Work together.
Mark Connolly is a native of Bedford, graduated from Dartmouth, and has an MBA from Northwestern. When he was a sophomore at Dartmouth, he was elected to the New Hampshire House, serving Bedford. Connolly worked in the business world and then served as Assistant Secretary of State, Deputy Secretary of State, and Director of the Bureau of Securities Regulation. He currently lives in Newcastle and is engaged to be married.
Mr. Connolly, your opening statement, please.
Glad to be here, honored to be here, and I have some 40 years experience in the private and public sectors, and I fought and won for New Hampshire families. That's the kind of leadership I will bring to the governor's office, and my campaign is all about a safer and stronger New Hampshire.
All right, thank you, candidates, for being here tonight. Let's quickly meet our panelists. Dave Solomon, reporter for the New Hampshire Union Leader. John DeStaso, WMUR political reporter, and Allie Morris is a reporter for the Concord Monitor. All right, let's get started now. This first question is going to go to Steve Marchand, but it's going to be directed to all of you at one point. According to our latest WMUR Granite State poll, not picking on you, but roughly 3/4 of the electorate don't know enough about the candidates on stage tonight to form an opinion. So with that in mind, tell us something about yourself. Tell us about a personal sacrifice that you have made to help you become who you are and help qualify you for this job.
Yeah. There's a few different places. I mean, one, growing up, as you alluded in the intro, in the west side of Manchester, I'm a first-generation American, French the first language of our home. We experienced some pretty difficult times, including bankruptcy from a healthcare crisis when I was in high school. It helps inform how you look at the world of public policy. If it wasn't for great public education at Gosler Park Elementary School, I don't get to be here today. Medicaid expansion, if we had it back then, we wouldn't have had the crisis we had. That toughens you up. It makes you become independent, but also realize that you can't do it all by yourself no matter how hard you try. And that's the spirit in which I realized that you can be fiscally responsible. You got to be really smart, but at the same time be progressive and inclusive in the way that we include folks that maybe don't start at the top on day one.
Councilor Van Oosteren, can you name a personal challenge or sacrifice you've made that's helped qualify you for this job?
Sure. I don't view it as a sacrifice, to be honest. I am who I am, not despite of my childhood, but because of it. I was mainly raised by a single mom. My parents were divorced when I was young. We moved around a lot. When I moved to New Hampshire for a job about 15 years ago, it was the 18th home I ever moved into. I was in my early 20s at the time. And so I have a lot of points of comparison when I say I'm so passionate about how this can be and has been for me and my wife and our boys the best place in the country to live and work and raise a family and grow a business. When I talk about restoring Planned Parenthood funding or the vote that I cast, the deciding vote to implement extending Medicaid healthcare coverage to 50,000 of our fellow citizens. I certainly think about what it was like to grow up when we didn't always have health insurance. And I think all of us are informed by our views, mine in the private sector, working as an executive counselor, but most as a dad.
All right, and Mr. Connolly.
Well, I can tell you that I'm a New Hampshire native, and my parents divorced when I was 5 years old. And my older brother and myself, we moved every year until my mother remarried when I was in the 7th grade, and I was coded as being a remedial learner, meaning I was a slow learner. And a grade school teacher picked up on the fact that so many kids I had checked out, and with her help, I went from the remedial class to the advanced class, and eventually went to Dartmouth College. And I will tell you that my whole life has been about understanding what it's like not to have much. I remember one time when my brother and I, my mother were living about when I was 9 years old in outside of New Hampshire. We had to hide the car in the woods because my mother couldn't make her car payment. So this is the kind of things that are going on in our country today, where people don't have a lot. And I've certainly been successful in my life, and I want to give back to people who have done so much for me. It's not a hand up, it's a hand out. And that's what we need to do in terms of our government. And government can help people. It can really make a difference in people's lives. It made a difference in my life.
All right, let's get to our panel now. First question coming from John DeStaso.
Yes, gentlemen, how are you? The first question is on the opioid crisis. We have a question for each of you. Councilor Van Ostern, you first. The state's alcohol fund, which is supposed to provide money for addiction treatment and recovery programs, has been raided almost constantly since its inception. This left critical services underfunded for more than a decade, with obvious consequences for our state's ability to deal with the ongoing opioid abuse epidemic. Will you commit to ensuring the mandated 5% of all state alcohol sales go toward fighting addiction? And if so, how will you do that?
I will. I have. It was part of the opioid plan that I've put forward in this campaign. It's also one of the key 5 points from a nonprofit, nonpartisan group called New Futures, which has put together a plan for how to stem the tide on this crisis. 2 of those 5 points involve funding. One is fully funding the alcohol fund. The other is making Medicaid expansion permanent. I talked a minute ago about how important it is that we have access to health care coverage. Well, part of that, when we expanded Medicaid to now 50,000 of our fellow citizens, part of that coverage now includes substance use disorder, a drug addiction treatment, an area where we have had too low treatment capacity in the past, but we're finally starting to turn the tide by bringing more access to treatment. In doing that, and when I cast that vote to help implement that law, we now have brought $608 million of our own taxes that we had sent to Washington back to come work here for us in New Hampshire. I have met individuals themselves in recovery who are counseling others what life without heroin is like. If they can commit themselves to that, we as a state can commit to overcoming this crisis.
And Mr. Connolly, for you, sir, the police chief of New Hampshire's largest city stepped into state politics last year, calling out the state's drug czar, Mr. Womack, for a lack of communication. Governor Hassan then resisted calls for Womack to resign until he eventually stepped down 7 months later. Should she have more closely monitored Womack's work and immediately fired him after the chief spoke out?
You know, I don't want to politicize this issue. It's a big issue. I can tell you that my plan basically is to get the drug czar and the emergency management head, get them meeting every week and come up with a short-term, medium-term, and long-term plan. We have to have communication. We've gone after the supply of this stuff. We try to wrest our way out of it. That's not working. We have to bring the demand down. That means rehabilitation, money in the communities. I've said in my campaign that I'd increase the tobacco tax by some 10 cents a pack. That'd be $17 million. And the drug and rehabilitation substance abuse fund, we need to put more money into that. This is not a $6 or $8 million problem. This is a $20 to $25 million problem. We have to get the money down to the communities and stop politicizing this.
All right, and Mr. Marchand, state officials have been criticized for failing to recognize the availability of a federal grant that could have been implemented much sooner in the war on drugs. In response to this crisis, what would you have done differently from the outset, and what would you change moving forward?
Yeah, a few points. Number one, I think we all have to admit, Republican, Democrat, members of the community, I think we all were a little slow a few years ago to realize the magnitude of the challenge and perhaps in so doing some of the options that might be available. So candor is a good place to start in any of these things. The second thing I would say, and this is well predating any thought of running for governor this year, I worked in the Seacoast to talk to folks developing operating budgets about how much it would cost to do at the ground level really good job of recovery with a dose of prevention as well. I came up with what is about an $8 million plan. That one of the secrets to this, when you study it and you talk to experts on it, it is remarkably little additional money. It is additional money, but it has to be hyper-targeted locally to those that are really in the front lines of it. One thing I would note, whether it's the alcohol fund, New Futures, excellent 5-point plan, and so forth, I'm the only candidate in this race talking candidly about the need for more money. If you want things that matter, you have to pay for them. And I think what you'll hear tonight outside of a 10-cent pack tobacco increase, you're not going to hear much from them about the need for increased revenue, but we need it to deal with some of these issues.
I'd say,
Yes, sir.
I'd take a difference of opinion on that. I've come up with specific ideas in terms of bringing revenue to the state. I just talked about, in terms of tobacco tax, I've talked about increasing the gasoline tax. We need to do that. We have some of the worst rural roads and bridges in America. I've talked about modernizing the business profits tax in terms of looking at the definition of reasonable compensation. We have transfer pricing going on. We have accounting mechanisms going on. I believe there's $20 to $30 million that is there we can get in terms of business profits tax modernization. I did say that the rates should have been kept where they are. They came down. But I believe now to bring them back up within a year of bringing them down is not good for business. So I think that's a wrong characterization of me.
Where does the money come from, Mr. Marchand?
Yeah, look, there are three places that since day one I've been talking about. One is I would increase the gas tax specifically to deal with roads and bridges. The second thing is I would bring the business profits tax back to the rate that it had been for a long period of time prior to last year, with both Colin and Mark criticizing it. Colin wrote an op-ed last year calling it a big corporate tax giveaway. He was correct. 2015 Colin was correct on that issue. I disagree with 2016 Colin on the issue. Mark also criticized that cut. It was a bad idea last year. It is a bad idea now. The third one is I would legalize, regulate, and tax marijuana. And in so doing, it would raise, in my estimation, at least $30 million a year. The Concord Monitor, in praising my plan, saying I'm the only one serious about revenue, said actually it could be closer to $60 million, but I try to lowball that to be conservative in my estimates.
Colin Van Osteren, you're invoked. Want to take 30 seconds?
I think what's important is that we focus on how together we can work to move the state forward. One of the reasons I'm so passionate about making Medicaid expansion permanent is because of the scale of how much it helps our state. $608 million that came into our state in the last 2 years, $800 million more that will in the next few years. And as a result, more people are covered. Last year, 27% fewer people showed up uninsured at our emergency rooms at hospitals around the state. That means less costs passed on to the rest of us. That's a great way to keep taxes low and have the money that we need to invest in our state's future.
We got to move forward. We'll get to you guys more. Let's go back to our panel. Next question comes from Dave Solomon.
Yes, gentlemen, it's been 3 years since the state settled a major lawsuit over its treatment of Granite Staters with serious mental illness, agreeing to spend an additional $30 million to improve services. But a court-appointed monitor in July issued a scathing report saying the state has failed to keep its promises, leaving patients without treatment, waiting in hospital emergency rooms, inappropriately institutionalized. How will you approach this continuing problem different from the current administration? Starting with Mr. Marchand.
Oh, okay. A few things on this. Number one is I think we need to take seriously the fact that independent parties have looked at this and come to the conclusion that while there has been some progress made in certain areas, frankly, there has not been the amount of progress made that was aspired to when the agreement was made. I can look at a number of issues, but I'm going to go back to something I said a moment ago. It is hard to look at the evaluation of the independent party and not come to the conclusion that additional resources will be needed, because part of the problem in the report is that resources have been spread so thin that there is some discrepancies in the level and quantity of service in different parts of the state. So some of this, while there are certainly best practices that are being employed, and in that sense that is improved, when you look at the math, and I'm a data guy, I'm a former auditor, I'm a guy that was known that way as a mayor as well, when I look at the math, it's hard to come to a conclusion other than we need additional resources to meet the standards we've agreed to do.
Mr. Connolly.
This is an absurd issue in terms of we should make a much better effort to the quality mental health system that we once had. I will tell you that we have now bringing in a waiver of some $150 million from the federal government over the next 5 years. This money, I think, should create an integrated system between primary care, mental health care, and social services like nutrition, transportation, housing. Has to be integrated whole. And we have to look at the individual in terms of all those areas. For the first time in 20 years, we're going to have the money to do it. We have to get the regions, the 7 regions in the state that are taking the lead on this, and make sure that we put the resources where they're most needed, which is in the communities.
And Councilor Van Osteren, same question.
You know, unfortunately, in government and in politics, it's like life. It is a lot quicker to tear down a barn than it is to build a new one. We used to have a mental health system that was the envy of the nation. And through a couple bad budgets and a recession and folks in the legislature wanting to cut as deeply as they could, we ended up in a pretty bad place, which is where we have been digging out of today. There are some specific things that we can do. I know some of this gets pretty wonky, I apologize, but yes, there's a federal waiver, the 1115 waiver, that will essentially help bring in $30 million a year for each of the next 5 years to bring behavioral health, things like substance use disorder and mental health, into the primary care delivery system in our state. But there are also things that we can do both as community leaders. For example, the Change Direction campaign that Justice John Broderick helped launch. You know, I sat with folks from both parties pledging to talk about how we can bring mental health out of the shadows, know the signs. But then finally, I want to mention some of this comes down to how we make this work as a state. We have great community mental health centers that need to be funded based on keeping people well, not just having payments when they get sick or injured.
Y'all can be as wonky as you need to be. That's what this is all about. Let's go back to our panel. Next question comes from Allie Morris in the Concord Monitor.
Good to see you. Polls show that Democratic and independent voters find Hillary Clinton not trustworthy. All of you have signaled support for Clinton, the Democratic nominee, without using a Donald Trump comparison. Why do you trust Hillary Clinton to tell the truth about issues facing our country if she is elected president? First to Mr. Connolly.
I think Hillary Clinton is qualified. I think she's gone through a real hailstorm of criticism, and certainly she could have done her emails differently. She has admitted that. But I don't see any reason for us not to trust her abilities to be the next president of the United States.
You know, I'll give you two reasons. One is because she's admitted that she's made mistakes along the way. She's human like everyone else is. But two, if you look at her career and her life, one of the things I'm most inspired by is her early work early in her career around the Children's Defense Fund, standing up for kids who needed someone to raise a voice for them. I take inspiration in that today, thinking about what we can do more in New Hampshire. I know she did that way before she was ever involved in politics. And she did it because she knew that the kids of our nation needed a stronger voice. I'm proud of that work that she did, and I know it speaks to what her values are.
And Mr. Marchand, same
Sure,
question.
there's no question. Hillary Clinton is uniquely qualified to be president. Her resume is as deep as anybody, non-incumbent president, arguably in modern history. And I think that she has shown over a long career an ability to perform at a high level. I would note again, as the only one up here that voted for Bernie in the primary, I think that when 60% of Democratic primary voters chose Bernie, it wasn't just a statement about Hillary. It was also a statement about the aspirations of where voters are. They want a level of authenticity and passion. You know, the old saying, I'm a Canadian, so the Wayne Gretzky would say, I'm great because I skate to where the puck is going, not to where the puck has been. And I think that what Bernie was talking about as a candidate was talking about where we need to go in a number of public policy areas. I've tried to model much of that aspirational quality in my own campaign this year.
Let's talk about another issue talked about a lot in this race, and that is climate change. And we're going to start with you, Councilor Van Oosteren. First, as governor, what steps would you take immediately? You all agree climate change is real, but as governor at the state level, what steps would you take immediately to combat the problem?
I'm not going to wait till then. I've already been working hard on the Executive Council to invest more in our clean tech and clean energy economy here in New Hampshire. There are solar and renewable energy projects in Berlin, Plymouth, Portsmouth, Durham, the largest solar array in the state in Peterborough, the solar arrays on the roof of the airport parking lot in Manchester that I fought hard for, most of which got passed by a 3-2 vote, most a bipartisan vote. And we need to have solar and renewable energy projects stop being the exception. They need to start being the rule, because when you invest in the clean energy economy, you tend to bring down energy costs, create local jobs, and protect the environment. One of the best ways we can do that is energy efficiency. And there's an area where the governor can lead a lot. I just voted recently to improve the snow guns at Cannon Mountain. It seems like a small thing, but this is a state park that spends millions of dollars a year on electricity. And by using more energy efficient apparatus there, they can actually have better snow coverage and lower their costs at the same time. That's one of the great things about the clean energy economy. It's a way to win-win and drive our economy forward.
Mr. Marchand, what's your first move as governor to combat climate change?
Sure. Look, the overall public policy, conservation is the best move in New Hampshire as a small part of a big region for electricity consumption and generation. The only way we're going to make big impact at the business level or the residential level is if we do a better job of conservation. And so I think expanding programs aggressively that encourage businesses and individuals to be able to save money and save energy is where you go. By the way, as the only candidate 100% against Northern Pass project, one of the reasons for that, as well as the NED project, one of the reasons for that is that I think in addition to the problems they bring to the table, they also would squash for the next 10 to 20 years a lot of really exciting projects that I believe are on the cusp of occurring. And that includes solar, it includes biomass, and it includes offshore wind. These are, as the economies of these are quickly getting better, things that we can do to modernize the grid. That's not a day one thing, that's a multi-year commitment. But when we talk about infrastructure, there are a few things we could do to get solar, offshore, biomass more quickly into the economic bloodstream than if we modernize our grid.
And Mr. Connolly, any immediate steps you'd take to combat
Yes,
climate change?
our stated goal, public policy goal, is to have 25% of our stated energy from renewables by 2025. I'm not sure we're going to get there, and we should be able to get there. We've had some of these legislatures in the past several years try and roll it back. We should have a commitment to have 50% by 2035. It's doable, and the way we're going to get there is a renewable portfolio standard. We have to start increasing our commitment to this area, and we have to have the regional greenhouse gas initiative, which has been basically starting to be rolled back in terms of bringing down the amount of carbon it's going to be in our atmosphere. We should recommit that in 2020, and energy conservation. That's a big part of it. So we have to really commit ourselves to renewable energy. And I've been working on this since the 1970s when I was a legislature, when I was a state representative, and I worked on it when I was a member of the board of directors of the New Hampshire Audubon Society back 15 years ago. This is a real issue. We have to get renewables, and we can do it if we step in and have the right leadership.
All right, thank you, Candace, for the question on that. Let's go back to our panel now for another very important question coming from Allie Morris surrounding gun violence.
So for those who support an assault weapons ban, Sig Sauer is a New Hampshire company that employs hundreds of residents here and also makes assault weapons. How do you balance that ban against their business in the state? And this is first to Mr. Connolly.
Yeah, I'm not concerned about a company making weapons in our state. I'd like to have the manufacture of that. I'm concerned that military-style assault weapons, Congress cannot and will not act on it. Several states have done it. I think we should look at it in terms of new gun sales and how we define that. It's going to be a New Hampshire question, whether it's certain features in terms of the magazine capacity, whether it's flash suppressors, grenade launchers. Let's put it this way. When you go back in the last 10 years and you look at gun violence, half of this has happened just in the last 12 months. Its increasing frequency is a clear and present danger. So the best thing a governor can do is stand up and protect the state. And I believe if Congress cannot act, we should do it and should put the consideration aside of how it affects business and look at how it affects our citizens.
Councilor Van Oosteren.
My first responsibility in looking at this is as a dad. I was a new dad when Sandy Hook happened. And I don't think any parent should have to kiss their kids to sleep with words like Sandy Hook in Orlando and San Bernardino over their head. I have full faith that the folks at Sig Sauer and Ruger can thrive and grow great businesses consistent with the basic common sense gun violence prevention policies that I believe make sense here in our country. I'm an occasional bird hunter myself, and I know that the Second Amendment, not just that I support, but the rights that I exercise are completely consistent with things like universal background checks, are completely consistent with making sure New Hampshire joins every other state in the country, every other state in New England, in sharing information with the background check system of those folks who have been determined by a court to have either be a threat to themselves or others because of their mental state. We need to get weapons of war off our streets, and we need action both in Washington and at the state level.
Occasional bird hunter, huh?
Once or twice a year, not very good.
Okay, serious questions. Thank you very much. Gun violence, Mr. Marchand, take it away.
Sure, yeah. I guess I don't think of it in the context of what employers happen to be or not be in New Hampshire. It's a serious enough issue that has to be a separate consideration. Some of the points you've already heard tonight involving expanding background checks, that seems like a common sense measure. Most Americans, most New Hampshireites, regardless of party, agree with that. Including mental health and including us in that database, as you heard a moment ago, to me also a very logical step to take. Including domestic violence as a background, as an element in consideration for any restriction in terms of gun access. Also gun safety for folks that are practicing their completely legal Second Amendment rights, but encouraging folks, even at young ages, to respect the gun safety laws and what they can do to store them more properly and such things like that are separate and can help minimize accidental deaths. The thing, though, is I talk to some folks who tell me, hey, I got an AR-15, I like to use it to hunt deer. And maybe this makes me a little different from some folks, but if you need 30 rounds that you can shoot in 10 seconds in order to shoot a deer, you might want to consider just buying meat.
All right, let's go back to the panel. Next question coming from John DeStaso.
Thank you. Along the lines of preventing violence, refugees have become an issue. And shortly after the terrorist attacks in Paris, this would be to Mr. Marchand first, some governors across the country, including our own Governor Hassan, called for a complete freeze of Syrian refugees entering the United States until the federal government could guarantee that the vetting process, quote, ensured the safety of the American people, ensured. Do you believe that there should be a freeze on Syrian refugees? And if so, what action would you take to make that happen here in the state of New Hampshire?
No, I disagreed with Governor Hassan on that issue. I said that at the time as well. I take this a little more broadly in terms of immigration. I'm a first-generation American. My folks came down from Quebec in the 1960s, and I was born and raised a couple miles from here on the west side of Manchester. When I look at the future of New Hampshire and America's economy, and I heard the Republicans actually talking about this tonight, the key to our economic growth, the key to getting younger as a state and as a country, the key to entrepreneurship is increasing the amount of immigration that we have in New Hampshire, irrespective of their country of origin. I have confidence at the national level that the screening is done at a point that I'm comfortable, irrespective of their country of origin, that they can come here, roll up their sleeves, and be a part of what has been the past, the present, and the future of New Hampshire's economy, which is legal immigration and being engaged as entrepreneurs and members of our workforce.
Mr. Connolly?
You know, we're the second oldest state in America, the fastest growing oldest state in America. The only meaningful job and population growth, believe it or not, will be 65 and older. So, and we have the lowest birth rate in America. So when I look at immigration, in terms of what we are as a people and as a country, we need to welcome immigrants into our state, into our country. And there's a vetting process now over 2 years for these kind of refugees. I welcome the Syrian refugees into our state. I welcome any politically harmed person who's coming to our country who wants to start a better life for their family, and I think it's the right thing to do.
And Councilor Van Oosteren.
You know, the governor's first job before everything else is to make sure that the people of New Hampshire are safe and secure. And I know the best way to do that is with deep, individualized security screenings for those refugees or new Americans coming into our state, not using nationality or religion as a litmus test. The truth is that doing that is kind of like a security blanket. It makes you feel better, but it doesn't actually make you any warmer. And in fact, I think it undermines our security because it empowers the terrorists who are trying to recruit people to hate us and attack our country. It gives them a reason to do that. You know, I saw a picture a week or two ago of a young boy, Syrian, in Aleppo, I think it was, maybe 5 years old, covered with grime and blood and just in a state of shock. He is not a national security threat to our country. He's a five-year-old orphan. And once you acknowledge that, you have to acknowledge that it's not his nationality that should be the deciding factor of whether somebody comes into our country or not, but it's, in fact, a deep, long individual security screening process. And I think that's the best way to keep our country safe. And I know that diversity is what brings us strength. It's not a point of weakness for our country.
Let's go back to John DeStaso for a related topic.
Real quick before I get to the next part, all three of you then are comfortable with the current vetting process?
I think there's always opportunities to strengthen it. I don't know that I'll ever be comfortable and sit back and say, yes, everything's fine. But I don't believe that using nationality or religion gets it any stronger. I actually think that weakens the system we have now.
The spirit of your question, yes.
The vetting process is at the federal level. Okay. It's my understanding it's a 2-year process. Excuse me, this is not we're not going to be at the state level monitoring and putting processes in place to figure out who's coming in here. That's at the federal level.
There's a related question here. Sanctuary cities is a term used to describe municipalities that place limits on their assistance to federal immigration authorities looking to apprehend or remove people who are in the country illegally. What is your stance on sanctuary cities in New Hampshire? Would you allow them, or would you prevent the municipality from getting state funding if it has such a policy? And this question is directed first to Councilor Van Oosteren.
You know, I think what we need to do most as a state, and thinking about our state's role, is make sure that when folks do come here, they have civics, they have English as a second language, they have vocational training so that they can translate the skills that they have learned in another country. Sometimes college-trained Iraqi translators coming to America, but need to be able to put those skills into practice and into place. That's something the state actually can do. There's too much politics about this, too many sound bites, too much hate that fills our national airwaves. We should focus on what we can actually do right here in New Hampshire. Not trying to pit one group of Americans against another, but talk about what we can do. Here's what our next governor can do. They can make sure that as folks do come here, that they're getting English as a second language and civics, and that they're learning how to earn a good living and support their family and contribute to our economy. I think that's what our next governor can do.
Mr. Connolly.
You know, this Congress can't do anything about climate change. They don't even admit it's there. Gun violence, they can't do anything about it. So in terms of immigration policy, we have some 11 million people who are in our economy, and we need to bring them out of the shadows. And in terms of sanctuary cities, so-called, You know, the only thing a governor can do is we have to enforce the law. You can't say we're going to enforce law over here. So yes, what immigration laws have to be enforced and can't be done selectively. But this problem, the root of it, is at Washington. We need to fix the immigration problem. And that is something that's been out there for years. And unfortunately, like so many other issues, Congress can't fix it.
Mr. Marchand.
Yeah, there's been a demonization, and Mr. Trump, I think, is one of the voices doing it, about immigrants in general and putting scare tactics in. And I take that personally based on my personal story that I told you a moment ago. When we look at the statistics, you can quantify this. The most entrepreneurial people in America are immigrants, their kids, and their grandkids. When we're looking at there is a decrease in entrepreneurial activity. This is where almost all net new job creation in America occurs, is from new companies that are formed, and disproportionately, they're formed by immigrants and their kids and their grandkids. My folks neither had a high school degree, both started their own business eventually here in Manchester and got into the middle class. That is the typical story. That is not a scary story. It's an inspirational story. It is the story of New Hampshire. Those mills a couple blocks away, my mom worked at the Pandora Mills a couple months before I was born, up until a few months before I was born. Those mills weren't filled with people that were seventh generation residents of Milford or something. Those were folks that were coming to this country to work their butt off. And when I look at the future, you know, it may not be Marchand anymore, it's Martinez, or maybe something else. It is great, and it is the future of our economic success.
All right, let's move forward with the rail project, commuter rail. This is something that you've all signaled some level of support for. Starting with you, Councilor Van Oosteren, this is one of the linchpins of your economic plan, but a lot of people feel that it would also come at the cost of our current infrastructure and the repairs. How do you convince people who are currently driving on dilapidated roads in the North Country or on red-listed bridges that it's worth the investment to go into a rail project?
The people of New Hampshire and New Hampshire business leaders are way ahead of the politicians on this. This is one of the reasons I ran for the executive council in the first place. No one ever dreams of being an executive councilor when they grow up. And basically there were two votes 5 years ago when I decided to run for office. One, the defunding of Planned Parenthood, which I was determined to fix, and we did. And two, the rejection of something called the Capital Corridor Rail Study, which is the economic feasibility plan that now tells us the following. It had been rejected. I ran on the issue. I won. We got the study done, and here's what it tells us. 5,600 new jobs will be created by local businesses in our state to bring passenger rail, if we bring passenger rail from Boston to Nashua to the airport to the mill yard in Manchester. 1.9 million square feet of commercial real estate development. This isn't about what we need to tell voters. This is a product of listening to voters, working with business leaders. I know a startup CEO who is desperate for rail because he wants to be able to hire as fast as he can to help his company grow as fast as it can. It's not a silver bullet, but it's one of the important things that we can do to power our economy and keep it moving forward.
Well, the commuter rail, Mr. Connolly, goes to Manchester all the way up to Concord. How do you convince people to give up their cars or drive significant distance to get to a station to get on a train?
Well, first of all, we spend some 46% of our energy dollars in the way we drive our cars in terms of New Hampshire. We sit in the most vibrant economy in the world, Boston, and we're literally at the end of the line. So to connect Boston to Nashua to Manchester, that area is the largest area in the United States without any meaningful passenger rail. I think it can be done. It can be done with a cost of between $4 and $7 million a year in terms of capital costs and operating costs. It should be paid by the cities, the towns, and it should be paid by the businesses that will benefit from this. And I also believe that the revenues will come off in terms of business profits tax, rooms and meals, the parking fees. That will be enough to pay for. If we're going to be a part of the 21st global economy, we have to have meaningful passenger rail. Let me tell you something. The study just showed that New Hampshire overall is a B rating, A through F. Guess where F was? Transportation. We have one of the worst transportation systems in the United States, and that's because we're totally reliant on the roads and bridges, and they're falling apart. We have to do a much better job of supporting our infrastructure, and we have to build into the 21st century economy, and that's passenger rail.
All right, Mr. Marchand, these projects haven't worked everywhere, these commuter rail projects. How do you make the case that, you know what, once it's built and the investment is made, it can sustain itself without digging into taxpayer pockets?
Look, more than either of these guys by a mile, I spent several years when I was the director of corporate at UNH talking to well over 100 businesses in candid, non-political environments. I asked them what the challenge is, and they said there were 4 public investments we had to focus on. Pre-K through 12 public education, deliver the best outcomes in America. Infrastructure, reversal of the opiate and heroin crisis, and building a culture of entrepreneurship. Those were the 4 clusters that kept coming up over several years. In terms of infrastructure, my criticism of Colin and Mark on this is While supportive of rail, we need to make sure that when we're talking to folks in Claremont or North Conway or my family, I got an aunt up all the way up in Pittsburgh, they need to know that we're not forgetting about them. This has to be put in the context of broader and critically important infrastructure investments, including bridges, roads, and some of the least sexy but most critical parts for local communities. That includes water, wastewater, and sewer. One thing we've done poorly over the last 40 years under both parties is we have disinvested state government's relationship with local government. I have a 5-word mantra that comes back from 20 years of experience as an auditor, a mayor, and at UNH. Public investment breeds private investment. If you do this right and you communicate it clearly to Claremont, North Conway, and Pittsburgh as part of a broader infrastructure package, you can get folks on board.
All right, let's change things up a little bit, go to a lightning round now. Just kind of get you on record on a couple of different things. If you can keep the answers to yes or no or just a few seconds, that would be great. So we'll start with you, Mr. Marchand. Would you be in support of mandatory education, firearms education in public schools?
Good question. Yes. Yeah. Gun safety is such an important part of avoiding accidents and poor storage, which leads to tragedy. I think early education would be extremely helpful in avoiding some of those tragedies.
Counselor?
I haven't thought deeply about it. I think the answer is probably not. I took a 16-hour-long hunter education course myself when I got my hunting license, and I think in circumstances like that it makes sense. But anytime we say everyone has to do this, I'm a little leery unless there's evidence that tells us it should happen.
And Mr. Connolly, what are your thoughts on mandatory firearms education in public schools?
I'm smiling because the course that Colin took, I introduced that legislation in 1977, and I'm proud of it. Yes, it's crucial we have education about firearms and the use of firearms. And we can't just put people in the woods and start going off and shooting. That's why we have hunter safety. And we should teach kids the importance of guns, what guns are all about, and the damage they can cause. Absolutely.
Let me ask you this. Do you support seatbelts? I mean, is it time for New Hampshire to make seatbelts and motorcycle helmets mandatory?
You know, we were asked this question the other day, and I said yes on seatbelts. And I said I would think about it on helmets for motorcycles. The more I thought about it, I think yes.
Counselor?
I'm less convinced on helmets. I have a friend who lives down in Boston who comes to New Hampshire multiple times every year and spends a lot of money when he's here because he wants to come up here with his motorcycle. And I haven't seen any evidence that convinces me that helmet law is absolutely necessary. And I fear that it might harm our economy.
And Mr. Marchand, same question.
Yes on both. I think there's a lot of evidence, like the other 49 states, that a helmet law is probably a good move. When I was 6 years old, before Route 101 got expanded, my dad, who drove motorcycles, he got in a nasty accident. It is through pure luck he did not die. They didn't even recognize him because he was so black and blue at CMC Hospital because of the accident. We need a helmet law.
All right, I'm going to ask you guys the same question that I asked Republican candidates a short time ago, so if you're listening, you know what it is. What time should last call be, Mr. Marchand?
For me, about 9 p.m. these days. Without thinking about it too long, 1 a.m.?
Counselor?
Up to cities and towns.
Up to cities and towns, there you go.
I think 2 o'clock or up to the cities and towns if they want to go earlier.
And you'd be okay with them going later than 2 o'clock?
No, I think 2 o'clock is the
You're
day.
capping it?
Yeah, capping it.
You capping it?
Not something I've focused on that much, to be honest.
It's a question.
I hear you. I'm not sure it's the most important thing to voters right now.
I'll be honest, I think I speak for all of us. This is one that we don't think about a lot in the
No, maybe
context
some
of running,
businesses
so,
would
yeah.
like it to be considered. Who knows?
Fair question.
Yeah.
All right, one more in the lightning round, and we'll start with Mr. Marchand again. This question is about process. Would you be in support of going to legislative sessions every 2 years rather than every year?
Well, I believe we did that until around 1994, if I have my history correct. I believe that it's like oxygen in a room. It'll fill whatever space you give it. And so that if you went to every other year, if that's what you're asking, we did that quite successfully for a long time. I would certainly be open to that because in what is a volunteer legislature, we have turned it into a full-time job, and that means the only people that can do it are retired people, wealthy people, and certain occupations.
Same question.
I'm skeptical. Twice in the 4 years I've served on the Executive Council, I've had to work with Governor Hassan to bring them back, first to expand Medicaid and second to tackle the drug crisis. Those were extra sessions, but they were emergencies we had to deal with, so I'd be hesitant to do less.
Mr. Connolly, thumbs up, thumbs down?
Yes, I think so because I think it allows more people to become legislators. That's more important. And, if we have a crisis or some need, we can bring legislators back. So I think it does. We should consider it. Yes.
All right, interesting. Let's go back to our panel now. Next question coming from union leaders, Dave Solomon.
Yes, gentlemen. Back to the economy. According to the Department of Employment Security, there are currently 18,000 vacant jobs being advertised in New Hampshire, and some businesses say they can't fill the jobs they have because of a lack of skilled workers. So, Mr. Conley, how can the Granite State attract new companies if the ones already here can't find employees?
Well, again, we have one of the highest outward migration rates of young people, and we have to convince the some 58,000 high school students they don't have to leave New Hampshire to start a family or a business. And that includes, I think we should be looking at internships, apprenticeships, and in terms of attracting new businesses here, if we have the kids who are wanting to be here, it's like build it and they will come. If we have an educated workforce, that's one of the big issues that businesses look at when they come to our state. We have to have more innovation in terms of education policy. That means career-ready skills from early childhood on. And I've said things like this. When kids graduate from UNH with one of the highest debt loads in the country, why not figure out a way to bring the debt load down if they're willing to stay here for a certain period of time, like 5 years, and commit themselves to the New Hampshire economy? We have to think about these things in much different ways than we have been.
Related question coming from Allie Morris.
You all support raising the minimum wage, but Mr. Van Ostern, what do you think the minimum wage should be? And more importantly, how would you convince the state legislature that it's necessary, given that the New Hampshire Hospitality and Restaurant Association reports the starting wage for a dishwasher is $12 an hour?
Well, I think part of what's important in this campaign is we don't just elect a good governor. We elect folks to the state Senate and state House who are going to stand up for what they think is best for strengthening New Hampshire's economy. I'm proud, by the way, I've been endorsed in this race by a majority of all Democratic state lawmakers in the state of New Hampshire, and most of both Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton steering committees in the state. The reason that's important is because you have to build those coalitions now. So yes, we need a higher New Hampshire minimum wage. I believe that the place to start the negotiations is the bill that Donna Soucy put forward of $12 an hour. I don't think you could do that right away, but I think it's a good place to start the negotiation. I also think it's absolutely critical that we strengthen our workforce. And I know this was the last question, but I don't want to skip over it because it's just too important. I dealt with this as a business leader at Stonyfield Yogurt, hiring folks, trying to help our business grow and hire great people to do it. And I left to help start a workforce development college at Southern New Hampshire University, probably the state's biggest, fastest growing employer right now, called College for America. We partnered with over 100 businesses. We've now enrolled in the past year 4,600 new students, mainly getting an associate's degree, almost entirely without debt. And that's a great way to power our workforce and power our economy moving forward.
And Mr. Marchand.
Yeah, sure. Two things. One, I think when we talk about what a minimum wage should be, it needs to reflect the values here of New Hampshire. And to me, that is both the value of the work literally being done and the dignity of the person doing it. And that means that we move towards a living wage over time, which reflects the real cost that includes transportation and housing, which in some parts of the state, like in the Seacoast where I'm at, can be significantly higher than certainly even the $12 an hour. In terms of the prior question, one of the reasons I got into this race is because too often I heard other candidates say, if we could bring businesses into the state, that would grow the economy. It is the opposite. You need to bring people into the state, and then businesses will come. And that's where, when I talked to 125 plus employers, they said pre-K through 12 education, infrastructure deficit, reversal of the opiate and heroin crisis, and building a culture of entrepreneurism.
All right, let's keep it moving. Next question coming from John DeStaso.
Yes, switching gears a bit to Mr. Marchand first. All three of you support repealing the death penalty, but you have said that you are the only candidate who is, quote, 100% opposed to it. So just to be clear, would you commute the death sentence of the lone person who's now on death row, Michael Addison, the convicted murderer of the Manchester police officer Michael Briggs? And why would you do that?
Yes. What he did was heinous, and nobody's questioning his guilt. But in a number of other states where the law is still on the books, and by the way, we're the only one in the Northeast that still has it, it is not uncommon, I believe Colorado is one such example, to commute it to life with no chance of parole. Look, here's where it's at. If you believe the death penalty is wrong, and I do, then it is not just wrong in the future, it is wrong today as well. And to me, when we have not executed somebody in about 80 years, but then the one time that you would actually get to impose or not impose your value system, you choose to execute, as my two opponents do, it is hard to say with a straight face that you oppose the death penalty as a practical matter.
Counselor, same question.
I would not commute his sentence. I believe as a matter of faith and conscience that we should have a sentence of life without parole for the most heinous crimes, not a sentence of the death penalty. But I also appreciate that we ask our law enforcement officers to put their lives on the line. In this case, quite literally sacrifice their life to uphold the rule of law that we have in the state. I don't think it's appropriate for an elected official to go back and try to change those rules after the fact, especially if someone has had every opportunity for a trial by a jury of his peers, an appeal through our court system. I hold that rule of law sacred, and I would uphold that as governor.
And Mr. Connolly.
Yeah, I oppose the death penalty. I think it's wrong, and we're one of the few countries in the industrialized world that does it. And I would say that in terms of Mr. Addison, he was adjudicated by his peers, and I don't think that the governor should impose his or her values on any kind of system. As I said earlier, the first thing you do is enforce the law. That's the law, and we should carry it out and not impose our own personal views on this kind of matter.
All right, thank you, candidates, for the answer there. And our next question is coming from going to all the candidates, and it's coming from Dave Solomon.
Property taxes, gentlemen. One of the biggest complaints from New Hampshire homeowners is about high property taxes. I'm sure you've all heard it. Would you consider a sales tax with proceeds specifically targeted toward property tax relief as a condition of any sales tax? If not, what would you do to lower property taxes in the first 2 years of a gubernatorial term, starting with Mr. Connolly?
No, I wouldn't. I don't think it's the right thing for our state. And yes, the property taxes are high in large part because Concord has basically downshifted so much revenues away from the towns and cities. We're starting to grow our revenues. This last budget, we were up some $100 million in surplus. I think that trend's going to continue, and I think some of those monies should go back to the town and city to give property tax relief.
Mr. Marchand, same question. Would you consider a targeted sales tax to ease the burden on property owners?
No, and in fact, if you want to see, folks at home, if you want to see your property taxes continue to go up by a continuation of the same mentality that both parties have looked at over the last several generations, you have two choices to my left, and you got me. And with me, what I'm saying is the number one reason why property taxes are as high as they are is because we have disinvested at the state level. We have created amazing inefficiency in infrastructure and education by everything from freezing the school building aid project to the employee contribution from the state. There are many examples where we used to do it and we got out of the business. In Planet Concord, I have not spent time unlike them in Planet Concord. In Planet Concord, they define a balanced budget as June, all set, slop down the cost to the regional and local level, and then they deal with it, and increasingly without the funds to deal with the responsibility, they got slopped down. Fundamentally, from my auditing days all the way to the present, you can tell we haven't had a mayor as a governor since Hugh Gregg 60 years ago, because if you knew what it felt like to be on the receiving end of that, you would do everything you could to change it.
All right, and Counselor?
I don't support a sales tax or an income tax, by the way, and I would do everything in my power as governor to stop either if necessary. I think both are bad for the New Hampshire economy. I do think we need to do more to provide property tax relief. I've proposed a couple specific things: having full-day kindergarten paid for in every community in our state, which would put less pressure on local school districts. I've also suggested, in light of today's court ruling, that it is past time for us to fully fund our current education formula and stop penalizing communities that are growing quickly. I do want to go back to a question earlier, because we talked about the minimum wage and we talked about strengthening our workforce. One of the important ways to do that, as I saw when I helped bring the Fairpoint strike to a resolution about a year ago, is that we have to ensure that workers all across New Hampshire have a fair right to bargain and organize, whether it is Fairpoint workers or the videographers here at WMUR who've been working to try to get a contract. I'm glad that there's been progress made. It's one of the reasons the debate's happening tonight, and I hope that all the parties involved can help bring that to a conclusion. I think it'll be good for everyone involved.
All right, time's actually flying, gentlemen, so we're going to get to our final question of the evening before your closing statement, and it's an important one. As governor, what would you do to make sure that New Hampshire residents, regardless of race, religion, or creed, what would you do to make sure that they felt like they were a part of their community? And Mr. Connolly, we'll start with you.
No discrimination on any level at any time. That has to be our stated goal as a state. That includes sexual orientation, that includes religious orientation. Anything that we do, people should have their own values, and the government should not impose any kind of litmus test on what the government believes is right, including a woman's right to choose.
Councilor Van Oosteren?
One of the great things about our state is that we have led the nation in treating our fellow citizens with dignity and equality and respect. We led the nation in marriage equality. Frankly, what we've seen in other states like North Carolina and Indiana, where they're actually passing discrimination laws to discriminate against their own citizens, isn't just wrong. I believe it's un-American. It's also forcing businesses out of their state. So I would say to those businesses who are thinking about where they should move, come here. Come here to New Hampshire, where we treat our fellow citizens with dignity and equality and respect in every way, whether it's for gender or sexual orientation, sexual identification, and yes, also making sure that we protect women's health and a woman's right to choose. We've talked on that a little bit tonight, but I want to make sure that we focus on it for just a second. Well, I just saw the 30-second mark, so I'm going to use less than that. Okay. But we have seen this treated like a political football in recent years. One of the reasons I ran for council was to get that funding restored. We did. It is restored now. I'm the one candidate endorsed by Planned Parenthood's Action Fund here in New Hampshire, and as governor, I will make sure we don't keep treating that funding like a political football.
And finally, Mr. Marchand, same question.
Sure. First, in terms of the Planned Parenthood endorsement, they also said during the endorsement, all three of us were rock solid on the issue of choice, and I'm the only candidate with a specific plan for paid family leave that would help us, I think, tremendously, our economy and working families. As a first-generation American, I think having a governor who knows what it's like to grow up in a household that is scrapping it out from day one is an important component of the message we want to send. When you look at the next generation, the young people we need to bring in, they are disproportionately people of color. They are people that are looking for diversity and inclusion. I'm the only candidate with a specific plan to bring gender identity and expression into the same level of private sector protection that we've done for sexual orientation. It isn't just the right thing to do because of morality, it is, but also because it sends a message to the very people we need to see New Hampshire as an amazing place to start a family, whatever that family looks like, or a business. That's the message we need to send to the next generation. The more inclusive we are, the better we will be.
All right, gentlemen, that's going to finish up the question portion of this debate, but we're going to get to our closing statements now. Each candidate will have 1 minute, and we're going to begin with Mr. Marchand.
Sure, thank you. Donald Trump has been a gift in many ways to Democrats in New Hampshire and across the country, at least potentially. One of them is that it means in all likelihood that one of us three, the nominees, got a good chance of being governor in 2017. I think that's going to be good for New Hampshire. But here's the thing. We've had Democrats in office for 18 of the last 20 years, and so we have an opportunity to stand on the shoulders of the good work they have done and to see what I believe what we are, which is we are a progressive state. I've got the best record of fiscal responsibility of anybody running in either party. Even the union leader has given me kind words on that regard in the past. And I'm the most socially progressive when we're talking about legalization of marijuana, when we're talking about paid family leave, when we're talking about elimination of the death penalty, opposition to Northern Pass, all of these and more. We are a blue state, bluer than the redistricting hides sometimes in our politics. And if we want to be aspirational and go for it this year, I think that I present the progressive vision of fiscal responsibility, inclusive values, the most progressive candidate running, the son of immigrants from Manchester who's done well on the Seacoast with family all the way up in Pittsburgh. That's what the future of New Hampshire looks like. And if we want to reach out and go for where I believe we are, we can do that this November.
All right, thank you, sir. Councilor Van Oosteren, your closing statement, please.
Well, thanks for taking some time with us this evening. In the midst of a national election that feels like a sad reality show sometimes, and when Washington just seems broken in so many ways, I'm proud of the progress that we're making here in New Hampshire. We're not perfect, but we get a lot right. And I believe this election is about whether or not we keep our state moving forward and who is best equipped to lead us into the future. I've been proud to work with Governor Hass in the last 4 years on issues like casting the deciding vote to extend Medicaid health care coverage to 50,000 of our fellow citizens successfully, and we did it without raising state taxes. I led the effort successfully to restore Planned Parenthood funding. That's progressive, and it's results that matters for New Hampshire families. We're building clean and renewable energy projects all across our state, but we need to make them the rule, not the exception, so that we can create local jobs and bring down electricity costs. All of these have happened because we found ways to work together across party lines, and I believe that's how we'll keep our state moving forward. If you agree, I hope you'll come to our website, vanoosteren.com, stay in touch in the race, and join with me in keeping New Hampshire moving forward.
All right, and final word goes to Mr. Conley.
Well, nice to be here tonight to have a discussion about our future. You know, the challenges for us are complicated, and a lot of people are trying to give simple answers. And it's about leadership and experience. Leadership in terms of how we define education, how we fund it. Leadership in terms of healthcare and how we fully fund Medicaid expansion. Leadership in terms of transportation policy, passenger rail. Leadership in terms of energy, fully committed to renewable energy. I respect my fellow candidates, but I believe I have the depth and breadth of experience to best represent our party in the fall election. I've shown leadership in terms of going after financial institutions that would harm our state. I've been a voice for the voiceless. Now, I'm not the candidate from Concord. I'm not the institutional choice, and I'm not a career politician. What I am is somebody who has a vision, who wants to go to Concord, execute that vision, do the best job I can, and then return home when the job is done. I know myself, I know I'm ready for this job, and I stand for a safer, stronger New Hampshire. Thank you.
And thank you very much to the candidates for joining us this evening. Believe it or not, time flies, and time is up.